Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Smith and I am the chair of this executive committee, and I would like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council's executive meeting taking place at 5:30 on Thursday the 9th of February 2023. So welcome both to all of you in the chamber and to those of you who are joining online. So members of the executive are, and I'll just ask them to identify themselves for the purpose of all the people in the room who know who they are already. So we have Councillor Collis.
Yes, Councillor Collis, Deputy Leader and Executive Councillor for Open Spaces, Food Justice and Community Development.
Councillor Bird.
Yes, Councillor Bird, Councillor for East Chesterton and Executive Councillor for Housing.
Councillor Davey.
Councillor Davey, Councillor for Petersfield and Exec Councillor for Finance, Resources and Transformation.
Councillor Gilderdale.
Councillor Gilderdale, Market Ward Councillor and Executive Councillor for Recovery, Employment and Community Safety.
And Councillor Healy is on her way. Then we have Councillor Moore.
Councillor Moore for Coleridge Ward and Exec Councillor for Climate Action, Environment and Biodiversity.
Councillor Thornborough.
Hello, I'm Ward Councillor for Petersfield and also Executive Councillor for Planning and Infrastructure.
And I'm also a member of the executive. I'm Councillor Anna Smith, City Councillor for Coleridge Ward and Council Leader. And we are also joined by Councillor Bick, Porra and Houck, who are not part of the executive but are very kindly coming along to offer us, I hope, a lot of robust questioning later. And online we are joined by Councillor Bennett. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, meetings and agendas. Please try to refer to specific page numbers within the agenda if you are referring to a specific paragraph. Can I remind all of those present of the importance of using the microphones at all times when speaking? Please speak close to and clearly into the microphone. Please ensure you have switched off or silenced any other devices that you have so they do not interrupt proceedings. I'll just give you a moment to do that, and whilst you're doing that, I'm going to do the same because I realise I've got another phone in here that I haven't turned off. So let's all make sure that we've taken all the devices and definitely got them onto silent. When you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. We all know each other very well, but a reminder that this is a formal meeting, so please do speak through the chair. If anyone has any problems hearing me or anyone else throughout the meeting, please alert me by waving their hands or advising a council officer. Councillor Healy, welcome, and I'll introduce you at the end when I've gone through this spiel. Please can those present in the council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, is likely to be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak, and if you are online, please also raise your electronic hand, and Sarah, you're going to keep an eye on that for me in case I miss anything. So, those participating in the meeting by Teams, as I said, either raise your hand or if you prefer, you can indicate in the chat column that you wish to speak. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private. It can be subject to an FOI or DPA request, and having watched along a couple of these meetings on YouTube, it also flashes up on YouTube at the point that you put the message into the chat as well. Make sure your device is fully charged and that you switch your microphone off unless you are invited to speak. Please use a headset if available when speaking. This is to our online colleagues, and hold the microphone close to your mouth. For the comfort of councillors, officers and the public, I may choose to call short breaks during the proceedings. If councillors or officers require a break at any point, please indicate to me and I will halt proceedings at the next convenient opportunity. So before we move on to agenda item 2, I'm just going to introduce Councillor Healy. Councillor Healy, can you introduce yourself and what your remit is, please?
Put me on aware there. My name is Councillor Healy and I'm the Executive Councillor for Equalities, Anti-Poverty and Wellbeing. Thanks.
So we're now going to move on to agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. Please could councillors declare if they have any declarations of interest and also identify which application their declaration refers to. And a reminder that you can declare interest at any time. If you forget something now, that's not a problem.
Chair, just in case, because it's the finance discussion on the exec, I think it's only right that I declare that I am a board member on the KIP board.
Yeah, Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm on the KIC board as well.
We note that KIP board membership on the piece, please. Okay, so we're now going to move on to agenda item 3. Agenda item 3 is minutes of the meeting of the 8th of December. They have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns or comments, please could members raise them now. Otherwise, I'm going to sign those as an accurate record of the meeting. I'll just sign these. Try that again. It's always the way, isn't it? There we are. Perfectly. Have my scroll. There you go. Now we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is public questions, and no public questions have been submitted for this meeting. So we will move on to agenda item 5, which is the General Fund Budget Setting Report 2023 to 2024. And I'm going to ask the Head of Finance that's Caroline Reiber, to introduce this report, and she will be doing that via Teams. Hello, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. The Executive is now presented with the final General Fund Budget Setting Report for 23-24. Previously, as a draft BSR, it was approved in the Executive on the 9th of December for public consultation and also presented for scrutiny at Strategy and Resources in late January. Alongside that, at that point, there was included a summary of consultation responses, and those are included in your pack today. The final BSR has been updated since the draft that has been seen previously, and I'll run through the updates briefly. First of all, we have had the provisional finance settlement, and indeed the final settlement was published earlier this week. The provisional and final settlements are much the same, so there is no
Caroline, we're going to
impact.
pause you for a second till we get the volume sorted. It's a little quiet in the hall, so just give us a moment.
Okay.
I think that should be better. Do you just want to say something to us, just to check?
Okay, just checking. Yeah.
You may need to get the microphone a little close to your face as well, if you're able to do that, or just speak a little louder.
Okay. I will try. I can't get it any closer, but I'll raise my voice a bit. So I was just saying the draft BSR was updated to final. One of those updates was the provisional finance settlement, which provided nearly £2 million more funding than we had expected and modelled in our calculations. The final finance settlement has now been published and confirms those figures. We have also done business rates calculations and have identified 3.84 million collection fund surplus that will roll into the budget for 23-24. We have estimated business rates growth at about 6 million for 22-23 and a forecast of 7 million plus for the following year. However, those calculations are still being reviewed and checked, and I would just take those figures for the moment as provisional. There have been changes to proposals since the draft BSR, and I will run through those briefly. S5110, so the savings, the bus subsidy savings has been removed. The URP 5012, which is member allowances, has been increased to 80,000 per year. And finally, in S5118, which was the toilet savings, the quayside toilets have been removed from the overall saving. We have also added in our proposing a energy costs earmarked reserve of £600,000 to support service budgets if needed. Members will be aware that energy costs is a significant pressure for our services, and latest calculations indicate that the budgets that we had across the services may not be sufficient. So this reserve will be available to support those budgets if needed. These various changes result in a change to the reserves from the draft BSR, where we were proposing to use reserves of 2.9 million, to a situation where in the final BSR there is a contribution to reserves of 2.5 million. We have also added narrative in relation to the forecast outturn for the current year and possible uses of the reserves in the longer term. Finally, I have now included my Section 25 report on page 59. This reports on the robustness of the estimates within the budgets and the adequacy of reserves. On the estimates, I conclude that there is significant uncertainty for the council, particularly around the local government funding and indeed the economic context in which we are working. This has meant that the estimates in the budgets are not as robust as they might have been in previous years, due to the significant levels of risk and uncertainty around them. And the energy budgets that I've just mentioned is an example of this. When it comes to reserves, we have adequate reserves for 23-24, which is the statutory requirement of the Section 25 report. However, in the longer term, I note that we have significant risks around the achievement of savings, the timing of that achievement, and also this BSR has identified a number of possible uses of reserves going forward, which, if reserves have to be used to support budgets, those potential uses would then fall probably to borrowing and cause additional pressures on our revenue budgets. So my conclusion is for reserves that they are adequate for the year ahead, but the council does need to look forward, particularly at savings, and plan for the use of reserves in future years. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Fiona. Do any members of the executive have questions for Fiona at this point? Otherwise, I'm going to hand on to next piece of presentation there. Okay, so I believe that we now have somebody providing feedback on the budget consultation. Caroline, is that yourself again, or is Andrew going to do that?
I think that would be Andrew. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. If now is appropriate, I would just comment that we undertook a different form of budget consultation this year. We've previously done consultations directly with the business community. This year we did a public consultation that was published after the...
Andrew, I'm sorry, I'm going to pause you there. We're having the same issue with sound. I just want to make sure we can get this right. So just hang on a second. How are we doing down there? Can you hear? It's a bit quiet, isn't it? I think we probably need to get this sorted if we can. Is there any way we can get this a bit louder? Just going to pause the live feed while we get this fixed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience there. Just trying to sort out the sound to ensure that everyone can hear the officers clearly. So, Andrew, you're good to go. I suggest potentially, as you work far in, I suggest start again from the beginning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief to not expose you to too much strained hearing. But so this year we did a more inclusive and wide-ranging budget consultation than we've done in previous years. After Executive approved the draft budget consultation in early December, we used our new digital online engagement platform, Citizen Lab, to promote the budget consultation. And we used community groups and other business networks to kind of ask their members to respond, to try and reach as far and wide as possible to have a more representative response. We had 248 responses, and I think overall you'll see in the report a brief analysis and summary of the key themes arising from that. So in general terms, there was broad support from the public that responded for a range of options the council could pursue to balance its budget in the future. Strong support for the council's approach to council tax, and then a variety of opinions on some of the specific proposals included, with support and opposition, and some of those kind of key themes set out, hopefully, in the report. So I hope it's useful. I hope it's clear. It's the first time we've done something like this for a long time. We will no doubt reflect and learn lessons about it for future years, but I hope it's given you a helpful input that can contribute to your thinking on the budget this year.
Thank you, Andrew. And I feel that this has been a very useful addition to our budget work, to be able to go out to consultation, to be able to get a sense of the steers we're getting from members of the public. Very helpful. Thank you for your work in making that happen. So I'm now going to pass on to the Executive Councillor for Finance, Resources and Transformation, Councillor Davey, to give us an introduction to the General Fund draft budget and to provide further comments on our responses to the budget consultation as well.
Thank you, Chair. And I won't take up too much of your time because there's more chance for a fuller debate at full council. But there's four things I'd just like to highlight, if that's possible. First of all is the uncertainty within which this budget has been put together. When I was looking through the list of things that we've tried to tackle within the budget whilst the world is going on around us. So Brexit, post-COVID, inflation, cost of living crisis, Ukraine, heating costs, and I think it's quite useful just to remember that this BSR process was commenced when Boris Johnson was still the Prime Minister. And so I think the point I'm trying to make within that is that the planning and the attempts to look both long-term and short-term are made more difficult by the, if you like, global and national environment. Again, a good example of the problems faced by not just us politically, but also by the council officers is that the financial letter that gave us pretty much the final settlement came through on December the 19th. So after the last exec and before this exec. And I think it's only right to say that although this has given us a degree of wiggle room, I suppose, in terms of getting extra money than anticipated, if you look at the long term, our savings targets in 5 years still remain just around £11 million. So there is still that general theme, that general thrust of having to look at finding savings within the overall budget of the City Council remains the same. The second comment I'd like to make is around our strategy. Whilst it has obviously adapted and changed over the years, there remains 4 constants that we want to focus upon, and there'll be no surprise to anybody listening or within the room. They remain tackling climate change, tackling poverty, ensuring that we offer affordable housing to those in most need, and tackle homelessness. And the fourth one that's become important to us is getting the council fit for purpose for 5 years' time within that savings envelope. This is obviously part of the process that we want to engage in, and the budget therefore reflects those priorities, even though it's been done at a time of savings. The consultation and the BSR process, I just want to spend a brief moment on. I think we welcome the work that's been done by Andrew and David. And whilst it was done in a short period of time, it does reflect our desire to hear what our residents want. And although it's a relatively small sample, nonetheless, it gives us the opportunity to make sure that we're touching base with our residents, making sure that we're able to be influenced by them. And my colleagues will talk about some of the specifics in due course, which I suspect will also be raised by the opposition. One thing to point out, though, that the key aims that the residents wish to see are us maintaining our services, particularly around waste, to reduce poverty and to increase affordable housing, which makes me think that the City Council, the Labour-run City Council, has its priorities correct. The BSR process, I have had brief conversations with both the leader and also Councillor Bick and Councillor Bennett. We do need to have a look at the process because it has felt a bit rushed, and I would hate not to just allude to that in this. And once the full council has agreed the budget for 23-24, we'll come back and speak with the leaders of the oppositions, plus my own leader, and look at what we're doing with this and if the new process can be adapted and improved. The final thing I'd like to mention, Caroline also alluded to, is our reserves. They are better than we anticipated. I think it's only fair that we should say that. And we're looking now more closely at what we need to do with our reserves. I think, whilst I do take Caroline's point about the potential impact around our savings targets, and you can only spend reserves once, I think the other issues that we as a group are wanting to just raise and to make sure that people are aware of, we do have a commitment to the Guildhall, and that will cost money. And we need to find ways of which we can spend that money effectively on the Guildhall. Otherwise, we'll have to take out borrowing, which would not be sensible. And the same rule applies to our commitment to the market. And so we have to find that money and make sure that that money is used effectively. And the obvious place to go for that is the reserves, although that requires greater detail in due course. The final thing is that there is increased heating costs that need to be tackled, and I know that Councillor Collis will be referring to this in due course. But to sort of make sure we don't lose out on that, there will be a earmarked reserve for heating costs, which I think you'll find within. I think that's all I'd like to say. Thank you. But thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. That's incredibly helpful. For the benefit of everyone in the room and also for those watching online, I just want to outline how I'm going to chair the next part of this meeting. We had a meeting back before Christmas, which presented the full budget in its draft form, and that budget has also been tabled at Strategy and Resources Committee as well, and most importantly, will then come additionally to full council, where the executive will jointly present our budget to the council for the council's vote. The role of this evening is to confirm that budget for going forward to full council. And what I'm proposing this evening is that we focus our discussion primarily on things that are different or things that have been raised for us to discuss. So, for example, the paper that was sent to us via Strategy and Resources Committee on the 30th, and also issues potentially that have arisen in the consultation as well. So what we won't be doing this evening is rehashing what we did in the meeting in November and talking through all those aspects again. We will be presenting the full budget, of course, in due course. And when we get to the section where members of the opposition are invited to ask us questions, obviously you're not limited to what we've been talking about in this part of the meeting. We'll start by having a discussion between the executive, which form the committee, and then we will go on to being open for questioning from both the Liberal Democrat and the Green and Independent groups. So just to explain for people watching, if I'm not bringing in other groups at this stage, we'll start by having that discussion via members of the executive. I also wanted to take this opportunity to extend my thanks not only to the officers, particularly, and always we have to emphasise the role of Caroline Reiber in this process. She is absolutely exceptional in the support that she gives us. I also want to extend my thanks to our Executive Councillor for Finance and Resources for the work that he has done, and to all the executive and indeed to the wider councillor body for the work that has gone on to get us to this stage. In the current financial climate, it is not necessarily a foregone conclusion that a balanced budget can be brought, and the fact that we take it for granted almost here is actually the sign of a lot of work that goes on, and we should never forget that work. So I'd like us to look at some of the issues that are potentially for particular interest or have arisen out of the consultations. And from that perspective, I would like to start by asking Councillor Collis to talk us through the item on the big weekend.
Thank you, Chair. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to mention, if that's okay, because they're particular items of interest. They're not things that have changed, but I want to explain why they've not changed, why we've kept them as they are. So there were 4 items of interest that I wanted to specifically mention, the last of which is the big weekend. The first one, as alluded to by Councillor Davey, is the rising utility costs. It's meant an increase in costs at our pools, our community centres and our events venues, and this has required extra work from officers to find a way of mitigating the impact of those increases on the council's budget. They've managed to do this in a really balanced way, including earmark reserves to cover future uncertainty, as Councillor Davey mentioned. That work has meant that we've been able to keep our pools open as much as possible, at as low an increase in entry prices as possible. Because we believe as a council that that's essential for residents' health and well-being. We've also recognised the need to make sure that our community centres are able to serve our residents as effectively as possible, particularly in their role as warm spaces over the winter, and recognising the extra support that some communities have needed. And a particular thanks to Councillor Healy for her input on that as well. The second item is the decarbonisation work, and we as a ruling group took a decision not to delay that work at our swimming pools. It could have been delayed, but we felt it was too important a part of the council's work towards achieving our net zero target by 2030, and thanks to Councillor Moore also for her input on that. The third item is the capital bid for the King's Hedges play area. Again, that is a sizable bid, but it is still in there. It's been a long time coming, and we have chosen to keep that because it shows how we as a council are continuing to invest in our communities and recognising how important it is for residents to have that safe and welcoming and healthy place to play. That was a very clear message, I think, throughout the consultation responses as well, and beyond that. And the fourth item I want to highlight is, of course, S5102, the proposal to cancel the big weekend. I should stress that this is a cancellation. It's not a proposal to run a different event or a smaller event. It is a cancellation of that event. I have said in previous meetings, but I want to reiterate it here because I think it is important. We know how highly valued the big weekend is by residents, how important it's been for building community cohesion and in terms of tackling inequality, but it is, however, an expensive event to run, and in a financial climate like the one in which we find ourselves, we do have to ask ourselves whether it represents the best value for money or whether we can achieve some of the outcomes that it brings in a different way. So we have taken the decision jointly as an exec and as a ruling group to retain this saving. It was interesting to see the feedback from the consultation. There were, or comparatively at least, a lot of responses on this item. So it's clearly something on which people feel strongly, but opinion was actually pretty evenly split on what residents saw as the best way forward. For as many people as wanted us to keep it, there were an equal number who felt that it was, in the current financial climate, probably not the top of their list of priorities. So it's not an easy decision to make, but I think it is, I believe it's a necessary one. There are lots of free events across the city that the council supports in different ways. So Strawberry Fair, Midsummer Fair, Pride, just to mention 3. So there's lots happening in the city, and we'll continue to support those events, of course. We're aware of the concerns, particularly about the loss of the Sunday Mela. And I know the events team, I've spoken with them this morning. They're working on how we take elements of what the Mela brought to the city and build it into an expanded Music in the Parks programme. We will be seeking external funding for that. It would need to be match funded by the council, and community services will be working on that sort of after the budget process is passed. Some of those bids would not be for this, those external bids would not be for this year, but would be for 2024. I'd like to conclude just by thanking the teams, both in Streets and Open Spaces and also Community Services. So heads of service, Joel Carre and Debbie Kay and all their teams, the city events team in particular, have done an awful lot of work on the big weekend. So I'd like to thank them for that work and the careful thought that has gone into preparing this section of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And do any executive members have any comments or questions they want to pose to Councillor Collis? Okay, so I'm going to...
I recognise that this is how you described to me you were going to run the meeting, but it does strike me that if we have questions about individual portfolios, it would be more logical to take them as we listen to those portfolio holders.
I think there's an argument either way, but what I'm going to do is just stick with the structure as we discussed. We'll come back, we'll give you plenty of time to ask your questions. So I'm going to move on to, actually I think I'll go to me. Because clearly one of the issues that arose in the consultation is around URP 5012, which is the increase in member allowances in line with the national living wage. So I wanted to just say a few words about that. So this is a decision that reflects the discussions held in full council in March 2022. So this is not a new debate. This is the debate that we held not quite a year ago, but almost a year ago. And this was the council decision to align the annual increase in member allowances to the national living wage. Now, due to high inflation allowances, this increased by 6.6% in 22-23 and will increase by 9.7% in 23-24. Now, that decision, it's never easy to make, but it's a reflection of the historic low allowances for the council members here. And I think at the core, it reflects the commitments that I know we all have as a council to ensuring that being a councillor is something that is accessible to everyone, and that we don't want to limit being a councillor to people with private means or highly flexible jobs. And there's a real danger if we don't address this issue and continue to address it. That's what we get. That becomes the outcome. I think it's also very important modelling, because we need to give a message that the national living wage and the rises in those national living wages are important for everyone. And I think that's a key message to share. So this is not, it's not an easy decision, but I absolutely stand by that decision, because I don't want anybody to feel they cannot be a councillor because they can't afford to be a councillor. I want to see this chamber reflect the people in our city. And to do that, we have to make these kinds of decisions. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Healy.
I speak, will it go on? Is it okay with these things on, yeah? Yeah, I just wanted to agree with the comments made. And I'm doing a national programme, a next generation programme for cabinet members around the country. And one of the LGA officers at that has told me that we are the lowest, we have the lowest rates in the whole country out of every local authority. And I just think unless we want to have this chamber full of people who are retired on fat pensions, we need to be paying our councillors properly so that we're not alienating people who are of working age. And it's really important that we actually should be paying this, and actually it should be higher than this. But I think as a first step, it should be going up to this level, because otherwise you're just not encouraging people of working age to be councillors. Thanks.
Councillor Thornborough.
Yes, I just want to reiterate that about where on a sliding scale we may be remuneration. At Civic Affairs last night, it was interesting that when we were looking at officers' pay, some data had been put together about where we were in that, and it showed us the whole range over 46 local authorities. And it was a very good discussion about the cost of living in Cambridge and the pressures of living in Cambridge. And I think this is very important that this is agreed this year, but going forward as well, we have the independent review, but it would be interesting to follow on with Mairead Healy to actually understand the range of remuneration for other councils and how we actually fit in as far as evidence and data is concerned. Thank you.
Councillor Collis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just sort of thinking beyond that, have we thought about how that will be communicated to residents? Because I think, there was less positive feedback on that item, and I suspect that a lot of residents won't understand what's involved, or, why would you understand, where we are on the sliding scale of remuneration? So has there been thought around how we're going to explain that to residents, or, talk about that decision? Thank you.
Right, I'll take Councillor Gilderdale, then I'll take Councillor Bird.
Thanks. Just one comment in that I think a lot of people think that we can calculate our hours and say we're paid a living wage, but actually if you were to calculate the hours that councillors work, we probably wouldn't be paid a living wage, and I think everyone in this room agrees that, and I think that clearly, that would take a lot of work to get to that stage, but it is really important that we acknowledge that we're doing some really important work and we're not, and that needs to be acknowledged in the pay, and as a Labour Council, we've always stood up for workers and for, striking workers. We've been out there last week supporting striking workers, and actually, as we work for the council, it's important that we relate that message to ourselves as well, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've got to agree with my colleagues what they've said, but also a resident has asked what we earn because they think we earn thousands and thousands, and when I actually tell them, they're very shocked how low it is, and for the hours everybody puts in, because the residents won't see what you're actually doing, all the meetings and stuff like that. So I think everybody's right and we should put ourselves forward for it.
Thank you. And Councillor Collis, I think that's an extremely important point about how that is communicated. I think it is vital. I think, Councillor Bird, I've had that same experience where I think there is an assumption that we're doing extremely nicely, thank you. And I think it's always difficult because I think we don't do this for ourselves as individuals. We do this for the people that need to know that being a councillor is something they can do. And I would want to absolutely reiterate what Councillor Gilderdale has said. I've frequently made my point clear that I think the government should fund a full and appropriate and generous pay package for all public sector workers, and I think that should be fully funded by central government. I think it's appalling that it's not, and I think I want to put that on record, that is something that we are in support of, decent pay for everyone. It's vital. So thank you. I think those are some helpful comments there, and I think we'll certainly want to take that on board. And Andrew, I think you're still on the call, and I think the issue around how we communicate some of these more complex decisions as to what goes through to the final BSR report, I think something we'll want to talk about in terms of council communication. So thank you. Councillor Collis, one more from you.
It's part of a whole, I think it's part of a wider way, and piece of thinking about how we communicate what the council actually does. I think it's all wrapped up in that. It's part of a bigger piece of work, I think.
Thank you, and I think that's noted, that sense of what do we do as a council and what do we do as local councillors. So that's really helpful input. Thank you. Councillor Moore, I know you had some items in your area that you wanted to talk through with us.
So the first query I think I had around mine was the reduction in staffing in environmental services. I did actually talk about this in quite detail at the last exec, but I'm happy to just explain again that this is a post. There have been up to now, or there are currently 7 enforcement officers, but one of those posts has been on secondment to housing for the past year. And actually things have changed since the last executive, in that the HRA have now put in a budget bid to make that secondment post in housing a permanent role. So we are planning, hoping that that person who has been doing that post for the last year, doing well, and since they're making the post permanent, that that person will move into the role, and that leaves a team of 6. When this 7th post became vacant due to the secondment, the team did try to recruit into the role. They were successful. The person didn't last very long, unfortunately, and then the role has been vacant. So the team have been working with 6 enforcement officers for the last year. In light of this, they've restructured the team, and it's now 3 pairs of enforcement officers, each cover a third of the ward, and that's working really well. They sometimes go out on their own, but they're also able to work in pairs when they're working in a more challenging environment with residents. And that's all I've got to say on that one. Oh, and just to say, if there's any other queries, that team has had difficulties with staffing for the past couple of years. So actually this new system of 3 pairs of 6 officers is working really well and is the best that it's been for a while. The other issue was toilets, public toilets. So initially, in our budget that we took out to consultation, we were proposing to close 3 toilets. One was Quayside, one was Mill Road, and the last one was on Chesterton Road. Due to feedback in the consultation, we have re-looked at this, and so we will not be closing Quayside this year. I cannot make any promises to the future, but we will be looking into those toilets and seeing what we can do. Those toilets in particular, one of many of our toilets that suffer from a high level of vandalism. So, of course, as a council and as a councillor, we do not come into this role to close public conveniences, but we also, as a council, do not want to have toilets that are open but are not in a good state. So we need, and we're investing in our toilets to improve them, but we're also spending a lot of money maintaining them on a regular basis and also dealing with the vandalism. The 2 toilets that we're closing, Mill Road and Chesterton Road, the team are looking into how those buildings can be repurposed to provide some other amenity for the local area, for the residents, possibly to provide an income for the council. There are also a number of toilets which will be closed from now on in the winter on weekdays, and some will be closed on weekdays all year round. These are our most low-use toilets, but we're keeping them open at weekends because if they're in parks, that's when they're most regularly used. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thornborough and then Councillor Healy.
Councillor Moore, if I think the low-use toilets, if repurposing them would be great, and I wondered if a hedgehog hospital could be considered because some of the toilets are close to parks, and the Cambridge Hedgehogs they carry out education programs and look at the nature, so it might be able to work very well for that kind of use. So I just wanted to put a little bid in for them. Thank you.
Councillor Healy.
Yes, thanks very much, Councillor Moore. I just wanted to ask, do we envisage there'll be any impact on our homeless community by the closure of any of the toilets? And if so, have we thought about how we'll address that? Thanks.
Moore, do you want to come back at those?
So with regards to the Hedgehog Hospital, I think I have heard that suggestion before. I'm not sure that that will be suitable for either Mill Road or Chesterton Road. However, we are also looking at, do have plans to invest in the toilets that we have and are keeping open on our parks. So whether there would be space in there for that, I can't make any promises. I was thinking more of including a cafe next to the toilets, but maybe we could have a cafe, toilets and a hedgehog hospital. I will definitely pass that back to the team. I like hedgehogs. I think we need to promote biodiversity in our city. The impact on homelessness, it's our city centre toilets that are used primarily, and so those are not the ones that we are closing now in this. And the ones that we are closing all have other public toilets that we're keeping open close by. So we do, as a council and as a city, we have a lot more public toilets. They're not just comparative cities, but actually cities in general. So we are well served with public toilets in the city. We just want to make sure they're in good condition and clean, and that we've got the resources to invest in them and manage them. Thank you. And to, if we can, reduce the vandalism.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on that? Okay, so Councillor Thornborough, I know that you had some items you wish to talk to as well.
So when at the last executive meeting we talked about the proposed savings by removing the 3 bus subsidies and from 2024, and that was always that we would actually retain the service by working with the combined authority to provide it, because they are the transport authority. But since then there has been a lot of conversations about public transport in this city, and there is a lot of great support for buses and a really good bus system in the city. So we have decided to leave the funding in, but it doesn't mean that we are stopping the discussions with the combined authority. We are in discussion with them, and only last week the interim director of transport at the combined authority committed to fund critical transport infrastructure that we now have in the city, and we will be having detailed discussions with them. So that was about the bus subsidy. I also just wanted to say that Dial-A-Ride is really critical service for many people who have mobility issues, not just in the city, but also in South Cambs. The service goes out to Royston and other villages around Cambridge. And I feel that we, in the GCP Assembly, and I'm looking to Councillor Bick to support this and ensure that the discussions about transportation in the city includes the likes of Dial-A-Ride, because it's particular to the city, but elsewhere in the combined authority they tried a Tring bus, which is a on-demand bus, and I believe it's been very successful. So Dial-A-Ride is our equivalent, and it needs to go hand in hand with a transition to a position where our residents can decide to use public transport and feel that they do not need to hopefully own a car, because there will be community cars and things like Dial-A-Ride. So I will be speaking to my colleague Simon Smith and Tim Bick, who is the chair of the GCP Assembly, to raise this very important public transport services in the city. We want to keep them, but we want the right authority to pay for them. So I hope come back next year that we will have some good funding arrangements from elsewhere, and therefore we may be able to make the savings and put money into other areas of our critical services. Thank you.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I know Dial-A-Ride very well. And also we can use the taxi card on there. The biggest problem with Dial-A-Ride is I don't think there's enough volunteers to drive, because like if I wanted to come to an evening meeting, I could book them, but they don't work in the evenings, which is a problem for a lot of disabled people, because they want to go out down the pub like anybody else. So that'd be great if we could get some more funding. And I'm looking at Councillor Bick over there to see if we can get some more funding so we can use it at night times as well. And it's wheelchair, all their vans are wheelchair accessible, so there'd be no problem there. So thank you, Councillor Thornborough, for bringing that.
Thornborough?
Yes, thank you. The Dial-A-Ride is at capacity. They need more electric vehicles. They need more volunteer drivers, and absolutely it can be expanded. But I really feel that it's part of the transition that we need to provide in the next few years going forward. So we need to work together on that. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, sir. Can I just ask Councillor Thornborough, why are we relying on volunteer drivers for this service? Why are they not being paid?
Yes, it's a charity, but you know there are, again, it's really important. It may be that we can review the whole of the service going forward and see how far it can be taken and how it fits in with the community cars and the buses, the public buses and things like that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And I think, I'm the city's representative on the Combined Authority Board. Councillor Thornborough, Councillor Bick are both on the on the GCP Assembly. There are various people in this room that are members of other committees. We have a complicated system locally, but the commitment that I think everyone shows to talking to each other and discussing across those levels means I have a good sense of confidence that we actually are getting together when we need to talk about these key issues. And certainly my understanding in my place on the Combined Authority Board is that there is a real commitment to public transport that really works. And I know that that's the commitment we have and the commitment that the County Council have, that the GCP have as well. And if we can get to that point, as you say, Councillor Thornborough, where nobody is forced into a car, no one is trapped somewhere because there is no other option than a private car. We've actually got public transport that works. That strikes me as being absolutely where we all want to be, and I think there's a lot of discussions as we go forward, but I'm very encouraged by the meetings that are increasingly happening that go across authorities, and I think that's certainly the way that we need to go. So thank you for that. Now, Councillors Gilderdale, Bird and Healy, I don't think am I right that you don't have anything particular that you wish to raise in terms of changes or particular issues from your portfolios? I know that you'll be speaking in depth about those things as we go through. I did just want to reflect that this has been quite interesting because this is the first time we've done the exec in this way. And what I would want to say to people watching is this has been a genuine discussion, and it's been really useful to have that discussion in an open and transparent way where people are watching that. So I think this has been quite a helpful piece of the debate to have, and thank you to executive members for engaging in that. In a moment, I'm going to close off this part of the discussion and open it out to questions from other councillors who are here. But there are one or two things that I personally wanted to reflect on. I think, and I alluded to this slightly at the beginning, operate in increasingly strained financial times. And we have been very fortunate over the years to be able to operate budgets that have been not had to make some of the tough decisions that other councils have had to make elsewhere. And a lot of that is down to the work of some excellent finance execs and some equally excellent officers who have steered us through that. But when I became leader back in December of 2021, I made it clear that those times were ending because the situation we find ourselves in after years of austerity, after very difficult financial situation in the country at large, and indeed in some of the issues are international, after more and more pressures on us financially as a council, that those times where we didn't have to make any tough decisions were receding. And this year we have had to make some decisions that we would not wish to make. And I want to pay real credit to the exec councillors and their teams for some of those decisions they've had to make, because they're not easy decisions, some of these. And what we have done through all of this is seek to ensure that the people who need our help most are prioritised. So you will see, for example, that we have not made savings on things like the Community Grants Fund. But those are things that are absolutely central to our priorities as a council. And we also note in the consultation the way in which members of the public have been particularly keen to see us maintaining our core services and really appreciate those things. And I want to pay particular tribute actually to those people who ensure that our streets are clean, that our bins are emptied, the things that it's very, very easy to take for granted, but we soon notice if they're not there. So I just want to reflect on the fact that these are difficult times. And I want to, again, because I don't think you could say thanks too much, say thank you to all those who have worked so hard to put this budget together. What I'm going to do now is to open this out to questions from opposition councillors. And what we didn't discuss when we talked about this earlier was the order in which we wish to do this. Now, Councillor Bennett, I know that you have another commitment later, and I wondered if you have anything to say if you wish to go first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to make some very brief comments at this stage. My party will be presenting their budget position by email, hopefully over this weekend, and verbally at full council. However, we can give you some edited highlights. As usual, we will act as an independent group rather than as an opposition group. If we agree with the ruling group, we are quite happy to say so. And most important thing we have to say is that we do wholeheartedly support the commitment to maintain the community's grants, and we share the ruling group's view that this is important and essential expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bennett. And your points, we're very grateful that you've raised those issues. Has anyone got anything they want to say in particular in response to that? I think it was more something for us to note and to hear rather than to respond to, but I'm more than happy if anyone wishes to say anything. So what I will now do is pass over to the Liberal Democrat group, some of whom are with us in person, and I believe Councillor Payne is joining us later, is that correct? I don't see her on the screen yet, but I'm sure she'll be with us in due course. So Councillor Bick has requested that he ask some questions that are more general around strategic issues first, and then we will move into discussing particular portfolios. So Councillor Bick, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. My group is probably going to bring forward an amendment at the full council, and we will obviously wait to your decision on your proposals this evening, which will crystallise what the budget to be debated at the full council actually is. We've highlighted a number of items in the draft budget which we wanted the executive to reconsider, and we're therefore pleased to see that two of those have all or partly been reconsidered and reversed, and so that is very good news, and we'll say something about that later. But I'm sorry to say that I would like to enter a bit of a complaint about the way the process has been handled. Discussion and scrutiny was completely suppressed, and we were accused of dishonouring our agreement to the new budget process. We beg to disagree. The Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Committee, where this occurred, has a specific role in scrutinising the draft budget, and the clue is in the name scrutiny. It's part of that role for the Strategy and Resources Committee to pass its view to the executive, and it does so with recommendations, and those recommendations should be open to be amended and discussed by the members of that committee. And members of this council should not be in a lesser role to be consulted and give their views than members of the public in the public consultation. And our feeling is that the way this worked, that we were subject to a false accusation by simply doing what the process said it was there for, and the result was, I think, a suppression of discussion, suppression of scrutiny, and so you probably have something there to put into the discussion and the review of this after we've been through the whole budget cycle. But it hasn't been improved by waiting nearly an hour and a half before we can answer questions, having heard your attempts at answering what you think our questions are going to be in the earlier part of this meeting. I would like to move to some questions about the overall budget strategy, and I would like to ask Councillor Davey whether he is happy, how happy he is with the progress of the transformation project.
Can I just check with Councillor Big? Is there more questions for me? Would it be easy if I tackle them all, or do you want to do them one by one?
They're not so related.
Okay. In terms of, if I can make a comment about your first point then, about the process, I look forward to receiving your comments, really, both about this meeting and the scrutiny meeting and the earlier exec meeting and the first scrutiny meeting, because I think we do need to review it, and no, that's my view, because I said that at the scrutiny meeting, sorry, the second scrutiny meeting, And as you also know, I've also contacted you and Councillor Bennett to try and establish a timescale for that. So I think all I'd say is this was always going to be a difficult section for putting the BSR through because it's the first time we were doing it. And it does need to be amended. I think there's a view that's shared on all sides, although I think, I'm not sure there was a deliberate decision to exclude you from the scrutiny process. And as such, I think everybody on this side would be against that because we do need a decent opposition and a good opposition, and the opposition has to have the right to speak. So if that's happened, all I can do is offer my apologies. So the review will take place. To the more pertinent question about the transformation programme, is it going as well as I'd liked? On a scale of 0 to 10, probably I'd give it a 7. There are clearly issues that we need to address, but we're starting to get into what I would describe as the meat of the matter. There's 3 obvious issues that have taken place now. First was the senior management review, which I think you've been able to contribute to, and that's clearly a starting point for us as an organisation. The second is the operational hub, which is again a really significant process as part of the transformation programme. And the third is the decision about the Guildhall. These are big, meaty issues and will require further discussion, in addition to which the work around how we operate, the operational team's work has now begun. There's been meetings held with the staff involved. So I think we're now getting there. I think all of us would probably share a degree of frustration about how quickly we get to a particular point, but I think we're right into it now. And so therefore, in terms of how happy I am, I'd say 7 to 8, 10. I think there's some minor stuff I probably want to see. I still worry sometimes about the language that we use. Sometimes it can be too jargonistic. I think that doesn't help. I think it needs to be clearer for both staff, councillors and residents. But overall, I think we're progressing well now. And I'm encouraged by the work that Jane Wilson, Robert Pollock and others are doing to get us into a place that's fit for purpose. Thank you, Tim.
If I could just follow up on that. So 7 out of 10 is, I guess one could characterise it as an encouraging score, but still some gap there. What would you say is the biggest bottleneck in getting to the 10?
Well, I don't accept there is a bottleneck. That's the point, I think. So I wouldn't make that jump to saying there is a bottleneck. I think it's taken time to get to a correct place. And I think it's about sensitivity, doing it correctly, getting it right, making sure staff are on board, making sure the negotiations are there, talking to residents effectively. So I don't accept there's a bottleneck. I just don't accept it's perfect because nothing can be perfect. I just think we're just in the process. And I think we're trying to make sure we get this done correctly with a proper timescale. In terms of the budgetary issues, I think that looks to be on track at the moment. And in terms of where we would want to be, it's maybe a bit delayed, but that will come in due course. But I don't accept there's a bottleneck, Councillor.
Thank you. And can I just take this opportunity to remind all councillors to address their questions and answers through the chair. Councillor Bick, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up the point about the Guildhall that Councillor Davey mentioned and refer back to your earlier comments about that, where you talked about it in terms of the money that needs spending on it, which I think is understood. But you talked about that exclusively in terms of reserves. I just wondered if I could invite Councillor Davey to examine that a bit further, because I think the intention is that capital receipts will play a significant role in the, if not the whole of it, but a large role in the refurbishment of the Guildhall, because it will enable us to relinquish other property of some value.
Thank you, Chair. I hope capital receipts will certainly contribute through the potential sale of Mandela House, but I would anticipate we'll require more. And when we have the appropriate financial planning, which should come up during the next 12 months, we'll be able to establish just how much that will be.
Thank you. And Chair, also to Councillor Davey. One of the stark findings of the consultation process on the budget was the really, really high value put upon maintaining essential public services, which were illustrated by the waste service. But I think, you know, I think all of us have said in interpreting that, it's about the things that keep the city clean and the things that everyone expects from their local council, the things that they feel they pay the council tax for and that sort of thing. So that's a really stark finding. I think more people put that as a priority on a question than on any other in the whole exercise. I wonder how that is represented in the remit of the transformation programme, and how it is governing that other category of savings which are characterised as immediate savings, which don't come from the transformation process, but are sort of come along outside that to save money in the interim. So really, how is it characterised, the public's really, really high value for the core basic services?
It's characterised in terms of how we'll prioritise what we do, Councillor Beck. As I said to you in your response to your earlier question, we've started talking to staff about how we feel we can enhance and improve the services about our core activity. And yet it's probably too early for me to say, it'd be wrong for me to say. We obviously have to have discussions as well with South Cambs in relation to the shared services, and that work has yet to commence. So there's quite a way to go, but I would anticipate that we, again, looking at the timescales concerned, we would hope to come back to SNR within the next 12 months with some proper proposals. But again, I wouldn't disagree with their main point that the public would expect our core services to be delivered and continue to be delivered effectively. And if that's what the public say, and our duty is to serve the public, that must be our priority. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I also would like to conclude the questions on the strategy, the strategic elements of the budget, by asking whether we could be informed what the forecast of spending for the current year, the most recent forecast of spending for the current year shows where we are likely to end up at the end of March. And maybe that's a question for Caroline Reber, who is online.
Councillor Beck, sorry, Chair. It's a very good question. I think, as you could probably guess, things have moved around so much. I'm loath to give you, in fact, I must be honest, I don't know the answer to your question at this moment in time. But maybe if you could give Caroline and I some time to get a prediction to you for what place will be in 6 weeks' time. I'm not sure why. Well, it's not for me to ask you questions, but we'll see if we can make sure we get you a proposed figure for where we'll be in 6 weeks. Thank you.
Chair, I wonder if Caroline Reber could perhaps answer the question, because I think it's probably not a complicated matter.
So as I was about to say, actually, Caroline, I see you've come on screen. I think
Yep.
you have something that you wish to say. So hopefully we'll be able to hear you a bit better now we've got our headphones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When I went through the additions to the final BSR, I mentioned that we have put some comments in about our forecast outturn. So that is the outturn for the current year. And you can find that on page 40 of the papers, of the meeting papers. So if I can refer you first to that. I'll just get that in front of me now. Yes, so you can see that that identifies the forecast outturn for the general fund as a £1.8 million underspend. But note that we would normally expect there to be carry forwards, maybe up to £1 million from that. leading to a forecast of a higher contribution to reserves compared to budget of 800,000. So what we have seen, that outturn is driven by principally two things: favourable variances on investment income and on staffing costs. But you can see that set out in the paragraph on page 40 of the papers. And we have also recently circulated the Q3 financial monitoring report, and these figures are taken from that. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. I hadn't been aware that that was another new element that had been put into the BSR, so that's now understood and clear. Chair, that was all the questions on the strategy. We had then some questions which are sprinkled through the different portfolios. So I think our intention was to do that in the order they appear in the papers from page 68.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I wanted to just talk about briefly first. I do think it's important to put on note that we did discuss the structure of this meeting earlier. So I note your comment about waiting, but that wasn't a comment that was raised earlier at a time when it would have been possible to have looked again at that structure. So this is a meeting of the executive, and the way that I wanted to set this out was to emphasise that that was the case. However, also wish to be as generous as possible in giving members of the opposition the chance to ask specific questions, bearing in mind some of the concerns you have raised about the process, and noting Councillor Davies' offer to discuss that process, and sharing absolutely Councillor Davies' concern that you need to feel that you've had as much opportunity as possible to ask the questions you need to ask. And that's why I'm not kind of doing any kind of limit of questions at this point and allowing you as much time as you feel you need. Having said that, I hope that we will be as brief as possible in our questions and our answers to ensure that we make this meeting run as smoothly as possible. So who is going next and on which portfolio?
Well, we were going to take it in the order from page 68 onwards. The bad news, Chair, is that that's me again asking you some questions, but if I could just come to the point about members' allowances, which I think you were trying to answer some questions earlier on which you hadn't heard, so it wasn't terribly efficient. So the first part of this is, yes, the public did say that, you know, that they were particularly unhappy with that, and I hear the debate that you had between yourselves, and there are a lot of inaccurate assumptions about councillors' remuneration. But that fact did come through from the consultation, and the change that was made to the budget in the sequence, having heard that, was to double the amount that is in the budget for that item. So we heard this enormous opposition to the big challenge to what was being proposed to increase councillors' allowances, and then we went and doubled the amount. It says in my papers on page 75, it describes the increase, and then it says in the final sentence, Labour Group increased this back to £80,000. And it's a very unusual thing to see. I assume someone should have taken that out of the script. I think embarrassment has already made sure that's gone online. But why was the increase from 40,000 to 80,000, having heard the consultation? And what was the Labour Group doing, increasing something back to something which we never even understood in the first place?
And just to clarify, our earlier discussions were not necessarily an attempt to preempt questions. They were an attempt to address the issues that we knew had already been raised through either the S&R referral paper or through the public consultation. It's basically a technical issue. the decision was made to increase allowances alongside the national living wage uplift. Given the nature of inflation, that required more than was initially considered. So it's not anything more than a technical response to the rate of inflation.
I wonder how that could be so, because the actual percentage was referred to in the original version of the papers, and it's the same percentage mentioned in this one. I don't quite understand that. Perhaps it could be explained.
So allowances 22, I'll give you a sense of where the figures are different, and then I'll give you a little bit more information as well. And I may at some point have to call on someone to give me a little bit more technical backup on this. But 22-23, 6.6%, 23-24 is 9.7%. The first 40,000 that was raised in the original draft papers are to do with the, in effect, the retrospective application of that. This is the application moving forward. The intention in the longer term is not to keep coming back to this, but to consolidate it into one piece that then goes across each budget in each year. Now, Councillor Davey, you may have some more technical details there. I can see you kind of...
I was just going through to get the official line, so forgive me, but my understanding is that the problem we faced was the fact that the initial 40,000 relates to an increase that was made to the national living wage in March last year. So in essence, we immediately started paying allowances in line with a previous decision that was made by council. So the 40,000, the initial 40,000 was to make sure we didn't have a funding gap going on. What complicated the then extra 40,000 is quite simply that the government then increased the national living wage in November, therefore after the date of the original draft BSR, which meant that the actual funding gap was suddenly was not just 40,000 but 80,000, and that's the reason. I think so. I need to go back and get, as you can imagine, Gary Cliff's given a very detailed breakdown. I'm quite happy to supply that to the opposition prior to full council, because I suspect that might help in the discussions you might want to have, or entries you might want to make to us in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I also wondered whether people will see this as entirely appropriate in the current circumstances, even relative to the time that the council originally discussed this, and whether it might be better in the circumstances if the council was linking members' allowances to staff pay. That, I think, is a more appropriate level of solidarity. And the reality is that most members of the council are not at a total income level where the national living wage is a relevance. And that's because it's unlikely to be a sole source of income for many councillors. There may be some, but for most, I think not.
Do you wish to, I wasn't sure if you wanted a response, Councillor, but I think you heard the arguments earlier on that were made, I think, quite powerfully by a number of our members. Whilst I do accept that some of us, including myself, are fortunate enough not to rely on the allowances, there are many, therefore, that can't. And I think it's really important that we are ensuring that we open up representative democracy to all, and that is therefore important that we get the allowances in an appropriate level, and I think this is a step, an appropriate level in which we do that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those times where whoever had got to the microphone first would have said pretty much the same thing. So thanks, Councillor Davey. Councillor Bitt, back to you.
Okay, I wanted just to ask about the item further down, page 68, on the removal of vacant posts. I would like if we could be advised what they were. If not now, after the meeting would be fine. But I would be quite interested to understand what is the process by which particular vacant posts are determined for extinction, and some aren't, and kind of how that is done, who's involved in it, and just so that we can understand, when we know which the jobs are, how those particular ones have been arrived at.
Councillor Bick. So the general process for this is a cross-council process, looking primarily at posts which have been vacant for quite some considerable time and assessing whether they are therefore needed in the process moving forward. This is slightly different to some of those that are generated very locally by a particular team. These tend to be ones that have been vacant for quite some time and are being addressed as part of the wider programme of looking at our overall efficiency. So should we keep something as a vacant post year on year, or actually should we just say this post doesn't exist and it hasn't been used for quite a while? In terms of the details, we can get those to you. In terms of more on the process, I think, Fiona, would you be able to say a bit more if needed? Would you be the right person? So let us know what you need.
Chair, now I would like to pass over to Councillor Hawke, who is going to ask in relation to the environment portfolio.
Councillor Hawke.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a few questions on, three separate items. I will start with the reduction in public realm enforcement officers, S5143. It's basically one big question, but then a few sub-questions. Because this reduction in enforcement officers, I guess it affects what I would call the shop front of the council. It has been said several times that this is what most residents see in their daily lives, or what the council does. I think Councillor Smith also highlighted, the people who clean the streets, for example. And obviously they deserve our special thanks. So my general question there is, what are the criteria to determine an acceptable level of service, or in fact a minimum level of service, or even an excellent level of service, and how many more cuts we could potentially accept in the future? So unless, if there are no criteria like this, then maybe there will be another cut next year and the year after and the year after. And currently, the remaining level of staffing is 6 officers. For example, is that just the minimum, the absolute minimum? Is that still acceptable? Is that still excellent? So maybe we could get an indication of what kind of level of service the council will be able to provide at this level. And one specific issue I hear quite a lot about is fly tipping. So maybe just as an example, do you think that this will still be under control? Would that still be an acceptable level of enforcement in that area? And not, then how else could we address it, if not through enforcement officers?
Thank you. And Councillor Moore, I think this is probably for you. What I would say is please do not feel constrained to say the things you've already said. So try to limit yourself to new points that need making in order to ensure that the opposition have got the full picture. Thank you.
I've got a couple of more little questions. I don't know if would you like to answer now? Because the number of regulations, I think, are probably likely to increase, or maybe you can comment on that. We recently talked about dog control, for example, in the Environment Scrutiny Committee, but also pan touting and A-boards and so on and so forth. So how is this going to be balanced with the expected level of officers? And you mentioned that sometimes officers will have to go out in pairs. So you said only when required. So I'm just curious, how much does that restrict the efficiency? So how many tours they can make? So how often will it be necessary that they will be in pairs? How often can they go on their own? So are there clear criteria for that? And finally, how much penalty income are we expecting to receive based on these officers? Or how much are we potentially also going to lose by not having these officers in place? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, no, we don't work to a minimum level of service. We work to having an excellent level of service, which is what I believe our teams provide the city. Sorry, I think I just leant into the microphone and shouted. So we are not, that's it, we're not based on a minimum level of service. We're working to a high level of service. Dealing with fly tipping, that's a whole team approach. It's not just the enforcement officers, it's the streets and open spaces team, our waste service. And one of the things that will help to make that easier is our improved IT systems and our reporting, so that residents, but also our own staff, can easily report things, and that can be tracked and more efficiently dealt with, investigated, but also cleaned up and collected by our teams. Regulations are increasing. How will we enforce them? Well, as I said, as part of the restructure, we've got these now 3 pairs. Obviously, they're not sort of locked into those areas of the city. They can work with each other, and they do work closely with our environmental health teams, our streets and open spaces team. It's all one big team working together. And currently, as I said, the team is better staffed and better working than it has been for some time. And so we don't see this as a problem, as likely to be a problem. However, obviously, we will monitor this. If something new comes in that suddenly needs enforcing, we will have to look at that again. But currently, we feel this new structure will be able to maintain the high level of service that we expect to provide for the city. I don't know about the penalty income, but we're not expecting to see a loss, because, as I say, this post has essentially been vacant for a year. So there should not be a change. The whole team is in a much better place than it has been. So we're not expecting to see a reduction in income. Thank you.
Councillor Hawke.
Yes, but I think it didn't address the general question. So how do you assess or measure that service is excellent, or how excellent it is? I mean, I do not doubt that the individual officers are excellent, but do the 6 remaining officers, will they be able to really address all the jobs that are out there? Because we definitely regularly get complaints about, especially fly tipping. That's one of the examples I gave. So, how did you come to the conclusion that they are, as a team, as a whole team, do an excellent job, considering the job that's out there, the tasks that are out there for them?
The conclusion, the way that I draw the conclusion is by being out and about in the city, hearing the feedback and seeing how well our city is cleaned and cared for by our teams. With regards to fly tipping, it's not, yes, there is fly tipping, but part of the problem is the reporting, so that we know about it and then it can be collected. That's not always the need to have enforcement officers involved. That's simply the Streets and Open Spaces team being there to collect it. The way that we, as councillors, can scrutinise whether we believe this is an excellent service or not is in our, what they called, area committees, where we get reports regularly, very detailed reports from the environmental services team. Wendy comes to ours. I don't know if she comes to East Area. I don't know if she goes to all of them. And she gives very detailed reports, so people can, every councillor and also members of the public can see exactly how many environmental crimes have taken place each quarter in each ward and what action the council has taken. So it's very easy and transparent to consider whether that's going up, whether it's going down, and if you feel the council is doing a good job.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Hawke, I'm going to let you come back once more, but we do have a lot of other portfolios to cover.
I've got questions on 2 other points, and they are shorter. Okay, so I'm going to to move on to the next point, the streets and open spaces, the recruitment freeze, S51339. So can you just elaborate a bit more which positions are there? And similar question as before, how you're going to measure the impact of this recruitment freeze on services? Thank you, Chair.
We've really been struggling to recruit into the streets and open spaces team. The vacancies that we have currently, I did have it there. I can tell you exactly what they are. Rapid response, 1 LGV driver and a general operative. But the ones on hold are the general operatives. As I say, we've really struggled to recruit into these positions. So when we are going through transformation after 10 years of austerity and cost of living crisis, obviously the most sensible thing is to maintain the fantastic team of officers and council employees that we have, and to ensure that we can keep as many working into the future by providing a good service and also being financially sensible in order to keep that going.
Now, I suggest we move on to the next portfolio. Councillor Porrer, is that you?
I've got another one on the market.
Councillor Hawke, okay, very briefly, please.
I would like to
because
go
we're
home as
spending
well at some
quite
point,
a
but
lot
I
of
think I
time
do
on
have
this.
a right to ask my questions as well. Just a flop, can you please maybe write to me or ask an officer to write to me to exactly the positions that you just talked about? Would that be okay? Thank you. And finally, on the market square, so there's a problem with market occupancy rates. So what are you planning to do about that, increasing these rates in the future?
Sorry, and just what I forgot to say was how the team have been trying really hard to recruit into those vacancies, and we actually do have 2 people started in January, and partly that was from having an open day at the depot, which was really positive, inviting anyone who was interested in the vacancies to come meet the team, see the depot, and it was very successful. So the team have been trying really hard, being innovative and successful, but nevertheless, we are where we are. The market has always struggled to fill all of the stalls, as anyone will know who's been down on a Monday or Tuesday. We always struggle to fill those. The Friday and Saturday are back to pre-pandemic levels. The Sunday is pretty much back. But the weeks we've tried, when I first became a councillor, we tried the £10 for the day charge. But since the pandemic, it's been more challenging. We also have some quite older traders, and they have been retiring. It's a hard job out in all weathers. So that's been a loss to us. We have also had a self-imposed limit on the number of hot food stalls. But as anyone who's walked around the city centre will see, there are lots of shops are moving to hot food. You know, it is what's popular. People don't so much want to go out shopping, they want to go out and for a meal or to a cafe. So we will be looking at those figures. We have been advertising on the radio and in a variety of locations. And we're also supporting and working with NAMTAB, the National Association of Market Traders, NABMA, to support new, younger traders. We were initially, before the pandemic, due to have the National Youth Market Traders Awards market in Cambridge. We were going to have it on this little space behind the Guildhall. So we're looking into whether that can come back again. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just disentangle myself from my mask. I think Also, Councillor Hawke, you do raise a really interesting point around measurement of impact, which I know not only from my council work, but from my professional life, could take us days to talk about, and rightly so. And I'm sure that's something that we can pick up outside of the discussions on this budget process as well. I think it will be really interesting to hear more from our team about how they measure impact across the piece, because there's a lot of really interesting work going on there. So thank you for that. Councillor Porrer.
Thank you. I've got two areas, one for Councillor Moore, so I'll start with that, and then afterwards for Councillor Collis, if that's okay. So first off, unsurprisingly, the public toilets. Obviously, very pleased about Quayside. That seemed absolute madness to close that, with the usage figures are phenomenally huge. And it's also really important because that's where our tourists and our businesses go, and to remove public toilet facilities is a really strange idea. However, we have still got 2 being closed and 5 with partial opening. So I suppose I'd be grateful for some detail on the evidence for this, because the usage evidence is sketchy, you know, particularly ones that are not charging. So, you know, on what grounds are we only opening at weekends or weekdays or summer and winter? You know, a lot of people use open spaces at all times. And for some of them, the cost of maintenance to keep them open for some of the time, which is obviously better than none, is 70% of the cost. So it's literally closing a toilet for quite a large proportion of the year to save £4,000, which to me seems, well, not good economic sense. So I suppose I've mentioned before the equalities data. I am really concerned about this. This will affect the most vulnerable. It will affect people with disabilities, parents with children, people who have limiting conditions. That means they can't go out without being near a toilet. And I think things like the Chesterton Road closure, relying on Jesus Green toilets, we know they're not great. We know the Rouse Ball Pavilion hasn't made any progress in redeveloping. They're overused. You know, when they're closed, we have a lot of antisocial behaviour. It's obviously mostly in my ward, the overspill of that antisocial behaviour, so I'm well aware of it. So I think my concern is it just doesn't seem very thought through for the comparatively very small savings. And for example, have you looked at, I know vandalism is an issue, I absolutely accept your point, but you know, there is an argument that coin-operated ones reduce vandalism. You know, so arguably it'd be better to have a coin-operated one than no toilet at all. But I suppose those are my concerns. I'd just be grateful if the Exec Council could sort of let me know. Again, it comes back to that evidence base, that measuring of outcomes and how we know that these are the right toilets to close if you're going to have to close them, because I can't see that from the papers. Thank you.
Thank you. So how do we know? So it's from the usage, and also then each one, just for a variety of reasons, each one obviously is slightly different. The costs then of maintaining those might be the regular cleaning costs, but also they include the maintenance costs. So how do we know? Some of those are estimates, but obviously we do have staff who go out to them sometimes multiple times a day. We also have, when they're on open spaces, our open spaces team who are passing by regularly, our waste crews. So although they're estimates, we're pretty confident that they're in the right ballpark. The coin operated, unfortunately, the coin operated ones don't seem to be really less vandalised than the other ones. And also, as anyone will know, who's got 20p on them. And there are significant costs to maintaining the coin operated. And 20p now isn't really, you know, with inflation, 20p isn't, we wouldn't want to spend a lot of money installing 50p, and then in a year, hopefully 50p will be still worth 50p, but you never know. So we have been looking at alternatives, whether you could have a card system, but it's more complicated and also introduces quite high costs. So that is likely to totally negate any savings that would be made on the cleaning and the maintenance. Yes, I agree, the Rouse Ball Pavilion needs investment, and that's what we want to do, is to make some savings so that we can focus on investing and maintaining the toilets that we do have open to a really high standard. I agree it is important for people with children or elderly people or people with issues where they need to use the toilet more regularly that we have toilets available, but we also need those toilets to be in a good, clean, safe, hygienic condition. And unfortunately, we can't do everything. And so that's what we're prioritising, investing in having good, high-quality toilets that are clean. Thank you. I think that was everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Can I ask Councillor Collis now, unsurprisingly, about the big weekend? And I do appreciate your previous comments earlier just about what you have been looking at. But I suppose my concern is that I would kind of wanted these conversations to have happened before we put forward the closure of the big weekend. I wanted to ask, so the COVID recovery money we've got, a lot of that is about generating footfall to the city centre. So I'm interested as to whether that's being considered. Because to me, this kind of event brings in a huge number of people into our city. You know, not just from the local area, but outside as well, which is obviously important to our local businesses. And I wonder, you know, whether you've considered combining it. You know, we have the country fairs, we have the food fairs, and obviously we've got the wheel there. Not something I was a great fan of, but it's there, and there's a considerable amount of income coming in for that was meant to support other events around the city. That was one of the arguments of the economic benefit. So for me, I think I'm concerned about the continuity. If we don't have it next year, it kind of drops out of the calendar and gets a lot harder to resurrect in future years. So, and I'd also be interested in, obviously we have the kind of free parts of it. So we have our fantastic community officers who come and do the sports and the kind of public health part. You know, we often have, you know, museums. We had some other public health from, I think, the county, if I remember rightly, last time, doing blood pressure and those kind of things. And obviously the Mela, lots of volunteers, and local bands. So for me, it's not just about kind of like the headline music in the evening, which I know is expensive. And I'd just be grateful for some more information about why that kind of hasn't been considered. Because we obviously have commercial sponsorship for the bonfire fireworks night that funds that quite substantially. And Parker's Piece has a lot of events, so I would really hope the executive will consider not removing the big weekend this year and trying to find a way that we can keep it in the calendar and keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Porra for her question. I can assure you that the team have considered every financial avenue they can to support the big weekend. You make the point about sponsorship for other events, and I'll reiterate comments I've made at other meetings. I think there's perhaps a perception that there is a lot of sponsorship out there for events. We have a very experienced events team. They spend a big chunk of their year looking for sponsorship. And, you know, their feeling and their feedback is that that is not out there. The sponsorship money simply isn't there in the way that it was before. I've also heard that myself from the bid and from other agencies. I'm sure I can see Councillor Gilderdale nodding at me. I'm pretty sure she's had similar conversations with the bid as well. So sponsorship isn't necessarily the answer that it perhaps was previously. You make a really good point about some of the sort of, free services that are added on to events like the big weekend. I did talk in my sort of presentation about perhaps including some of the Mela in an expanded music in the parks offering, and I see no reason actually why that couldn't be added onto that as well. I think you're right. It brings a lot of benefits to local communities. What we're losing in terms of a city centre event, though, we are able to put into enhancing events within local communities that we know local people will be going to. One of the things with a city centre event like the big weekend is, and I don't have the exact figures on me, but we know that a fairly high proportion of visitors to the big weekend are not actually from Cambridge and are not from local communities. By supporting events based in local communities, we can be very sure that the benefits are going to the people that need them the most. I think that covers it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that explanation. I think my slight concern is obviously if we're using the money from this to support other events, then it needs to be somewhere else in the budget, because at the moment this is just a cut. So I suppose that would be my concern. I'd welcome any more information, not necessarily now about that, but about what other events are being subsidised and how we're doing that. Thank you.
Yeah,
that, Councillor Collis.
yeah, happy to have that conversation. I mean, any additional money going into the expanded music in the parks programme, like I think I said earlier, would be seeking external funding. It would generally have to be match funded by the council. So I know the community services team are looking, for where they can find that money. We're not talking anything like the amount of money that it costs to run the big weekend. We're talking small amounts here, but making sure that those local events are as good as they can be and as diverse as they can be. Thank you.
Now, I know that we haven't got Councillor Payne online yet. Councillor Bitt, you might be.
Yeah, I think Councillor Payne won't be joining because she was going to be asking those questions, and so we dealt with that another way. I think she was held up travelling. We have one final question, if I could, to Councillor Thornborough. The discussion we had earlier about the bus subsidies. So I think that it's really good that you have listened to that and taken that out of the budget to remove those remaining bus subsidies. It seems to me to be something that carries some risk to it at this point, but I really do believe that that is an outcome we should work for and hope for. And I think the original justification was that the City Council ought to be able to stop paying for those bus subsidies because the GCP is developing a strategy which ought to enable that to be paid from somewhere else. And I mean, that to me seems a logical point of view. In reality, if the GCP plans or anything like them come to fruition, it would be a very small part of a big mosaic of bus services that they would be subsidising. But the point at this point is that we cannot be sure that that the GCP plan will happen, and there's just been this huge consultation. We don't know what the outcome of that is. We haven't even heard what the assessment of it was, and we don't know what the decisions will be on the basis of that. So it would be quite a risk to pull the rug from those particular bus services, some of which would seem to get key workers to work in Addenbrooke's across the city for night shifts. I think that was the original reason for them being subsidised, and I think what we really wouldn't want to jeopardise transport for those people, and would want to have a bigger conversation about it before ever that became on our agenda. So I think it's really good. I mean, it's hopefully something that can come back on our agenda in the future. But I think we do need to wait and hear what happens and comes out of the GCP process before we make a move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bitt. The bus subsidy actually goes to the combined authority, who the money goes to them and they pay for the services. And I'm very pleased that our chair has secured a precept for bus transport recently. So we're working on the assumption that the combined authority are very well aware of what the bus subsidies are and that they can step up and cover it. But I absolutely take your point about the GCP and all of the discussions about public transport and ensuring that we keep the services we've got, which we made this decision some time ago, and that's why we got it. And let's hope it can be resolved so that we continue with these and even a better service. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it for your questions? I want to make sure that you've had the opportunities to ask everything that you need to ask.
Thanks, Chair. That's all our questions.
Thank you. And I also do want to say publicly that I'm very grateful that you gave us an alert as to the particular items you wish to focus on. That allowed us to ensure the right officers were on hand should there be any technical questions needing answering. And I think that's a really useful and helpful thing. Thank you for that. So if there are no further comments or questions, I think we come to the last and very important part of the meeting, which is to move to the vote on the recommendations. Now, do you have a copy of the recommendations right in front of me that I can read out? That would be incredible. Thank you. So we have quite a significant set of recommendations here. I am not planning to read them all out. It's on page 16 of your agenda pack. I'm suggesting that we take those recommendations together en bloc unless I hear any complaint about that. Looking like she really wants to go through them one by one, but I'm going to overrule that. So can I see votes in favour of the recommendations? Thank you, and that's unanimous. Can we please note that? So with that, the recommendations are approved. The meeting will be closed. Hang on a minute. The meeting will be closed in just a second. Please could I ask members to leave the building promptly via the Pease Hill exit to ensure everyone has left the building before the facilities team lock the exit. Please could the meeting producer now end the live stream.